House in Baltimore right now, and the Orioles taking on the Tribe here this week before getting back into the American League East against the Tampa Rays this weekend. This guy travels up and down the DMV and up and down I-95 from Baltimore to Washington, covering all things regionally Orioles and Nationals for ESPN. He is ESPN Eddie Matz out on Twitter and has recently been in Brazil, not drinking Caprianas or doing the samba, but doing a little baseball in Brazil, which we will get to that momentarily. But first up, happy summer to you, Eddie. I know things could be going better for the Orioles, and quite frankly, the Nationals have made the pennant race over there in the National League a little bit somnambulent, haven't they?
Somnambulant. I'm not sure my brain can handle words like that. Yeah, they are. It's a romp right there. A combination of them being good and everyone else being really bad/hurt, which is the exact opposite of the Orioles, where they can't seem to avoid injury recently and have been strong, and everyone else in the division seems to be just passing them by.
Well, in the case of the Orioles, this struggle is real, and I think all roads for me, look, they can't do anything about Davis. He's on the DL, they got to pay him. J.J. Hardy, we knew he was breaking down to begin. That's fine. Britton and O'Day get hurt, but Machado, in what should be, the spring of his career and heading into contract year next year and trade bait and signing bait and $400 million, $300 million and all of that. He's having trouble hitting 220 right now, Eddie, and I don't know what the organization can make of this, and I think they were prepared to handle Jimenez stinking and pitching woes. I think Buck and Duquette knew all offseason that they would be working the Norfolk Shuttle and all that, but I don't know that the organization was mentally prepared for Manny Machado to be struggling in the way he is right now.
Yeah, no, nobody expected this, and it's a huge blow because even with him being the guy that he's been the last couple of years, the Orioles still probably aren't good enough to do what they're trying to do. With him playing the way he has been offensively, we've seen it. It just there's nothing going there. And like you said, Davis being hurt doesn't help. Mancini's actually been filling in fine. And the way Mancini's playing, it almost makes I think there were a lot of people that questioned that Davis contract when he signed it. Now you see what Mancini's doing, and it really makes it seem like, well, shoot, it would have been just fine with that guy for less money. But of course, Davis has been sort of in one of his swoons, and when he gets going, you don't think like that about him. But yeah, Machado, it's crazy, and it's kind of like what happened with Bryce Harper last year. It's almost like one of those Freaky Friday things where they switch places. And last year, everyone was talking about Machado having surpassed Harper as being right there with Trout as the best players in the game, and everyone was wondering what was up with Bryce. Now it's the exact opposite, and who knows? Maybe at the end of last year, we found out that Bryce might not have been healthy the whole year. Possible that Manny could have some of that going. Of course, we know he had his wrist dinged up a little bit. That didn't help. But there's a lot of things going on. He's got contract issues I'm sure that's not inconsequential, right? There's some pressure that goes along with that. The rest of the lineup's not hitting. Pitchers aren't pitching. So, if you're him, you're probably feeling like you got to hit a 5-run bomb every time you're up. And anyone who's ever played the game knows that when you're thinking like that, it doesn't usually lead to success.
Eddie, I've been releasing the Peter Principles. I wrote this book about Peter Angelos 4 years ago. I got 14 chapters and about 95,000 words in it. My wife got cancer, and I put the book away for 3.5 years. I never brought it out. Now that I've brought it out to sort of re-edit it, I'm kind of shocked at how edited it was and how ready for distribution it is. So I've been releasing a chapter every week here all summer, and I think it's a bit of a cautionary tale for where they are right now. My pal Marty Conway always refers to Angelos as unorthodox. That's one way to put it. But where the organization is with Machado, with potentially winning a World Series this year or next year, if you really believe they're capable of doing that, and the end of next year really is the end of a lot of things. Duquette, Showalter, Jones, Britton, Machado, all sitting there, and you point out the Chris Davis money that was spent, and that will always be used as a hindrance for them to get more pitching, to sign Machado. It's money that's guaranteed. It's $23 million a year for 5 more seasons after now, and a lot of that really does go back to the desk of Peter Angelos, who apparently he was the most excited in the organization about signing Chris Davis last offseason, that this wasn't a Duquette or a Buck Showalter thing. And they walked away from Wieters and they did okay. And the St. Louis Cardinals walked away from Albert Pujols and they did okay. My question is for the Orioles and what side of Bet Angelos may wake up on as to whether they're going to walk away from Machado, because if they're going to walk away from him, I'd rather see them deal him in the next 5 weeks, maybe even to the Yankees or somebody like that, and pick up some prospects, pick up some pitching, pick up something you're going to be using in 2019 and 20, because it doesn't feel like me that Machado is going to sign here. And if he's not going to sign here and this year is a lost year, boy, other organizations like the Chicago White Sox had no problem dealing off Chris Sale. Organizations like the Yankees last summer had no problem having a sell-off. This is a tough conundrum. This is a tough decision. I don't say there's any right or wrong way to go, but we're trusting Peter Angelos to make this decision at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's a really hard decision. Nobody knows outside of the Orioles front office, like you, me. We don't know for sure whether the Orioles think they have a chance of signing Manny. It sure doesn't seem like it from the outside, right? Based on the suitors that are going to be involved, and based on the way that the Orioles spend money, and what you might expect Manny to get on the open market, regardless of what he's going through right now. He's going to get paid. So to me, it seems like 50-50 at best, right? Just spitballing out there. And if that's at best, I agree. I think they need to trade him. I think it's really hard to do. If you care about the Baltimore fan base, I think there are some fans who kind of see it as, kind of break it down in objective terms and say, yeah, sure, if you trade Machado right now, he's got a year plus left on his deal. They're going to get a lot back in return for him. They can restock.
The question for me is, what is 800 at-bats of his worth over the next year and a half? Is it really going to bring a world championship here in the next 18 months?
It depends. If you think they can win a World Series, I personally, the way they're constructed right now, even if Machado stays and plays his best baseball, I don't think it can happen. They just don't have the pitching. It remains to be seen what they would get for next year, pitching-wise, how would they tweak things. But I don't think they have it. And even if they had a little bit better pitching, I'm not sure the lineup is constructed the way it needs to be to win it. So I don't think they can win it all. So to me, it's a no-brainer. Even in this winter, I was saying trade Machado, trade Britton. As far as Britton's terms are concerned, his value was never going to be higher. We didn't know what was going to happen to him health-wise. But even if he didn't get hurt, his value was never going to be higher than it was this off-season. And I didn't personally believe that they were constructed to win it this year or next year. So for me, yeah, of course, I'm not Angelos. I'm not Dan Duquette. It's a much harder decision for them. But from the outside, for me, it's absolutely 100% trade him.
This whole glory era of Oriole baseball, the last 5 years, really was spurned on by trades and McPhail and Adam Jones and Chris Tillman and Chris Davis. And, that's how this is birthed. And I think the same thing is true for what the Yankees are going through right now, as well as the Houston Astros and a bunch of other teams. It really is about deft trading and, selling high and buying low. And this organization historically has not been great at that, and they've been waiting a generation for a Machado type of player to come along. This is a really disturbing kind of summer all the way around. I think from where Gausman is and where Tillman is and where Duquette and Buck are at the end of their sort of rope with a year and a half left and coming back next year looking lame duck if something isn't done. This thing's teetering right now, and a lot of good decisions need to be made right now, and I don't know what they are, but it certainly feels like they're a little frozen right now between now and the end of July as to what to do.
Yeah, and like you said, there's a great point you make about them and waiting forever for a player like Machado to come up through the system, and he's the kind of guy you build your franchise around, and now we're sitting around here talking about, let's trade him.
Well, it feels like he just got here, right? I mean, like literally.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then if you do trade him and you go into I don't know if you want to call it a rebuild because there's still some other pieces here, but people forget, not that Orioles fans, I wouldn't say they've been spoiled by the last 5 years, but I think some people almost forget already what it was like before that. So if you trade Machado and you go into rebuild mode, are fans ready for 2, 3, 4 years of baseball that's not going to be very pretty to watch? Of course, you could argue that there's times right now when the baseball is not pretty to watch, but it is a sticky situation, and you're right. There's a lot of tough decisions to be made. it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Well, after watching the Gonzalez's and the Chens and the Tillman in his prime throwing the ball, and to watch Gausman, Jimenez, and Wade Miley, go out there and try to do this 3 or 4 days a week and waiting on Bundy every fifth day. The pitching's been far worse than we thought it was going to be, but I don't think any of us really believed that Wade Miley was going to be serviceable or that Jimenez was going to make it through a Sunday notwithstanding. But the Gausman thing, much like the Machado thing, if you would have told me that Gausman and Machado were going to play and stink this year, I would have said, nah, there's no way that's going to happen. They're the reason the team's going to win 90 games this year.
Yeah, those two guys producing the way they're producing or not producing is completely changed things, right? The Gausman thing is huge because, second half of last season looked like he had turned the corner, was ready to make the leap, and now it's almost like he's back to square one if you look at the numbers, and, it's almost unbelievable. Bundy, like you said, he's been the anchor. Tillman, I don't think anyone, me personally, I wasn't convinced that he was healthy. So what he's doing right now isn't terribly surprising because I don't think he's fully healthy. It's kind of obvious to me, even though we haven't heard that yet. Miley and Jimenez were the wild cards, and they continue to be the wild cards. But the Gausman thing has been huge, and I think people also underestimate the loss of not having Britton there. Brock can close, and that's fine. And there's other depth there, and Gibbons does a nice job. But just any bullpen, when you lose a guy that good, it just thins everything out. And with the Orioles, especially because the rotation is as weak as it has been, it really hurts them not having another solid arm in the bullpen. So, they've been cobbling things together. They've always done the Norfolk shuttle thing, but lately the guys that have been coming on the shuttle, it's like, who are these guys, right? Like, it seems like daily you turn around and you're like, I've never heard of that guy before. So it's concerning, to say the least.
He is ESPN Eddie Matz out on Twitter, and you can follow him at ESPN.com as well, covering all things baseball here in the region for the worldwide leader. Let's go around baseball a little bit. Obviously, the Tribe coming here this week as a team that also struggled, as did the Cubs. Some of the struggles have been curious through these teams that we believed were stacked all off season. Cleveland's pitching hasn't been any better either, and they're struggling with the same sort of hangover that the Cubs are. The good news for both of those teams in those central divisions is those are the weakest divisions in baseball, and we still feel like Chicago and Cleveland are going to run away. But for Cleveland right now to go into Minnesota over the weekend and beat them up, Orioles are getting them kind of at a weird time where it feels like they woke up and smelled the coffee up at Target Field over the weekend.
Yeah, and it helps when a couple guys get hot. Right? Like Encarnacion finally started to do what they thought he would do when they got him. So all it takes is one guy to do that. Ramirez has been hot, Jose Ramirez. So, offensively that changes things. Kluber is a guy that you expect to compete for the Cy Young annually, and he early on wasn't doing what he's supposed to do, and lately he's starting to pitch more like Corey Kluber, like you expect from him. So, we're almost halfway through the season, but it's we're not there yet, and it's still early. So, that first 40, 50, even 60 games, you never know what you're going to get because, guys go through slumps. So if you start off in slumps, pitching, hitting, both of them, it's going to affect your fortunes. But lately the Indians have looked like the Indians that we saw last year. And like you said, the division is not strong. And now they're coming into Baltimore, and the Orioles haven't been playing well in recent weeks. So, it'd be easy to see them steamroll in Baltimore and then continuing what they've been continuing to do. But Indians still have plenty of tools, right? Coming in, I think they were everyone's preseason pick to at least win the division and potentially go to the World Series. And even though they started off weak, I could conceivably see them doing that. I picked the Red Sox at the beginning of the season to go to the World Series, but I haven't beaten the Indians in the championship to get there. So we'll definitely hear from Cleveland before it's all said and done.
We talk about Machado and the Orioles' issues leading up to the trading deadline and whether they will or won't, whether they'll buy or they'll sell. There are a lot of teams out there that are a piece or two away and feel like they need a little something. Obviously, the Nationals could use some bullpen. The Yankees clearly could use another starting pitcher at this point. But, these little pieces that are going to be put together over the next 5 or 6 weeks are going to, I think, in the end, determine this pennant race. And there are a lot of teams out there that are in a mode right now where dangling players and feeling like one little tweak, one little push or shove here. But the Yankees, to me, are the most fascinating team with all the money. the kind of year they've had, and I know they've had a bad week here, getting themselves beaten up by Oakland over the weekend, but I'm buying what the Yankees are selling, and I'm buying the fact that unlike the Orioles, I feel like they're absolutely going to make good decisions the way they did last year. I think the Yankees are for real, and I think they're going to be accounted for in September.
Yeah, there's no question. The offense is ridiculous, right? I don't know that everyone stays as locked in as they have been, but they're going to score tons of runs. Like you said, they could use an arm, but who doesn't need an arm, right? So they're definitely going to be in buy mode. Remains to be seen who's going to be in sell mode. That's the problem right now. You talked about the Nationals needing bullpen help, and it's one of the Nationals bullpen situation. It's one of those ones where why don't they get someone right now? Well, it's not that easy, right? Same thing with people who need a starting pitcher. You don't know what the market is. The market is not formed because, we're still more than a month away from the trade deadline. So the way the wild card is constructed now, I think I saw something recently that said every single AL team was within like 4.5 games of a playoff spot right now, which is crazy if you think about it, because there's some teams that are, Oakland's playing like 450 ball, but they're still not that far from a wild card spot. So,
well, that's kind of the scary part for the Orioles if they really believe they're in it. You know what I mean? Like, teams that aren't in it, like the Yankees last year, were close enough. They could have talked themselves into not selling, but they didn't. And I think that's the toughest thing an organization can do.
It is.
And it really does go back to whoever is at the top of the top, because you don't go dealing Manny Machados or go having a sell-off on July 31st if the owner isn't down with it, whoever that person is.
Yeah, that's what killed the Orioles in, 15 when they traded Zach Davies for Gerardo Parra. They were like 4 or 5 games under 500, like in the last week in July, and then they ripped off 4 or 5 in a row, and all of a sudden it was like, hey, wait a second, we're in this thing. And they weren't in that thing. Even if the trade had worked out well, they weren't in the thing. And the trade didn't work out well, and it remains to be seen what's going to come of Zach Davies. Last year, he looked like the next Greg Maddux. This year, who knows?
He looks like Mike Maddux.
Gary Maddux. So you never know, but yeah, there's a lot of teams that you just don't know. So in these next 4 to 6 weeks, it's going to become a lot clearer. And until that market forms, you don't know what you can get. You don't know who's buying. You don't know who's selling. That's why that last week or two before the deadline is so crazy.
The thing with the Nationals, though, there really is no urgency because that thing's kind of boring. I mean, they're going to win the division. They're going to win it by a lot. Houston's going to do the same thing in the AL West, although I do think, Texas and the Angels and even Seattle, to your point, in the American League, may be competitive. None of these teams in the National League East are going to be competitive. The Nationals just need to make sure they get the best guy on the market, not the first guy on the market.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think everyone thinks they're just going to, even no matter what happens between now and the deadline, there's no way they can lose that division. And chances are there's not. But, recently they had a run of like 3 or 4 games where they lost 4 in a row, and 3 of them were bullpen losses pretty much. And it cut their lead from like 12.5 to 8.5. And 8.5 is still, everyone would love to have an 8.5 game lead, but you never know. I mean, crazier things have happened. So to just write it off and say, they're going to win the division hands down, it's not quite that simple. I mean, they should. But yeah, they need to make the good move. They made the good move last year when they got Melanson. They didn't re-sign him, but while he was with them, he's as solid as it gets on the back end. So you would hope that they would do that again this year.
I think we all have seen the Houston Astros emerge this year, and that thing kind of came out of nowhere in May. Boy, what's going on in the National League West? And I know we're all a little asleep to it here at this point. And I was out of Colorado for a couple of days a few weeks ago back on Memorial Day, and there was a little Rockies fever out there in the mountains. But Arizona and the Dodgers coming on. Boy, those 3 teams are really, really good right now. All playing 600 ball. They've all gone a week without losing here recently. They're going to be a force to be reckoned with here all summer long. There'll be some late-night baseball of high quality being played in the NL West.
Yeah, as you look at their run differentials, they have the top 3 run differentials in the entire National League. Only the Astros and the Yankees are better in the majors. So I think people expected the Dodgers to be where they are. The Rockies were kind of like the sexy sleeper pick, which they seems like they've been every year for the last handful of years. But this year they're actually making good on it. I don't think anybody expected the Diamondbacks, which is funny because if you think back to a year ago in 2016, coming out of the winter prior to that, the Diamondbacks were the sexy pick, right? They had signed Greinke, and everyone thought, great, they're ready to roll. And then they didn't do it last year, so it's not totally surprising that they're kind of like a year after the hype. They're the post-hype sleeper. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. They're going to beat up on each other because they haven't played each other a ton yet, so they're going to start beating up on each other. scary thing to me is the Diamondbacks have been doing it without A.J. Pollock, who you could argue is, that one of their best, if not their best, all-around player. Although, Goldschmidt, it's hard to make that claim. But they've been doing this without Pollock. So when they get him back, that's a scary thought.
Well, for the Goldschmidts and the Arenados, this is a nice little coming out party, as it is in Houston for Correa and for we've even got the second baseman of the Astros now doing national TV commercials. I've been checking that out. So not even many people know who he is, but they're going to know by the All-Star break. Luke and I are headed down to Miami for the All-Star game next month. For anybody out there listening wanting to follow our journey, Eddie Matz is our guest right now. He is ESPN Eddie Matz out on Twitter as well as at ESPN, and you have been traveling down in Brazil doing the baseball thing. And, Eddie, I come of Venezuelan stock, and we're not allowed to go there anymore or we'll get robbed. But a lot of baseball coming out of Venezuela, but not really in South America where soccer has dominated that continent forever. And I know down in Brazil and Argentina, also huge basketball followings on the worldwide stage. Baseball in Brazil, really?
Yeah, well, that was kind of the impetus for the story because Brazil had never produced a major league player until 5 years ago. That was Yan Gomes when he debuted with the Blue Jays. He's with the Indians now, but Blue Jays were the ones that signed him, and he debuted with them. And then since then, they've had two more. So they've had 3 players in the last 5 years, which doesn't sound like a lot, and it's not, especially when you mentioned Venezuela. I think Venezuela at last count had 365 major league players, which is crazy because Brazil is 10 times as big as Venezuela. Brazil is larger than the contiguous United States, over 200 million people, and yet they produced 3 big leaguers. But like you said, soccer is religion down there, right? The country does not have an official religion, but soccer is the unofficial religion. So, when Gomes came up, I was kind of intrigued. I was like, oh, maybe Brazil's the next frontier, and I've been wanting to do a story on that for a while. Finally got the green light from ESPN this year. So in April, I went down there, spent about a week down there. And the kid that we're hanging the story on is this pitcher named Eric Pardinho, who last year pitched in the World Baseball Classic qualifier in Brooklyn against Pakistan. He was clocked at 95. He was 15 years old at the time.
Wow.
So he's a 15-year-old throwing cheese on the world stage against grown men. And so the international signing period kicks off on July 2nd. And so when that happens, he's expected to sign right at the beginning, right? Because some guys, they don't sign right it's like an annual period from July to the end of June. And the hottest prospects sign, boom, right on day one. So he is expected to sign for more than any Brazilian prospect has ever signed, which on the one hand, that's not saying much because Brazil hasn't produced that many guys. But on the other hand, it's the most than any Brazilian prospect.
What kind of dough are we talking about here to get a kid out of Brazil?
Like $5.
6 real.
So the previous record, I think, is 880,000. A guy named Luis Gohara, who was with the Mariners, they signed him. They traded him this offseason to Atlanta. He's currently ranked as one of the top 100 prospects in baseball. He's a big, burly pitcher. Kind of reminds people of CC Sabathia. He's a Double-A right now. So that was the previous high. Pardinho is expected to come close to doubling that. And so, we're talking about somewhere between $1 million and $2 million. To give you an idea of how much that is, if you compare it to the Cuban guys, the Cuban market is completely different, right? Like Puig and Moncada, those guys signed for like $40 million, huge numbers. But the record for a non-Cuban prospect is, I forget the exact number, somewhere about $6 million. Lucius Fox, who signed, I think, last year. So that's the non-Cuban record. So $1.5 million is still, pretty big deal. And like I said, for a Brazilian player, it's kind of unheard of.
Well, the Cuban market's like huge. I mean, we had the Pirates sign a second baseman out of Cuba recently, and that's something the Orioles haven't been good at, right? I mean, literally.
Yeah, they don't play that game. Although it's changing though. So that money, even the Cuban money, goes away because the new collective bargaining agreement. There used to be no cap, right? You could, if you wanted to pay the luxury tax and get hit hard, and you wanted to sign somebody for $40 million, fine, go ahead. Now it's a hard cap, so the most the team can spend is kind of complicated, but to dumb it down, it's $4.75 million is the hard cap that teams are allowed to spend annually. So in that context, $1.5 million is a lot of money, right? Because there isn't going to be a $6 million player from non-Cuba. There's not going to be a $40 million player from Cuba because there's a hard cap. It can't happen anymore. So relatively speaking, it's a lot of money, especially for a kid he's now turned 16. And down there, the competition it's nothing, right? Like when these kids get on the world stage, you can kind of see, okay, he's kind of good. But when they're competing against the players in Brazil, it's hard to really know what to make of them.
He is ESPN. Eddie Matt's out on Twitter. We love having him on the program, and no wonder I couldn't get you on. You're running around Brazil. You're covering all these baseball teams. At some point, I hope the Orioles give you something to write about this summer other than trading deadlines, but I'm not holding my breath at this point. I have a feeling you'll be spending more time in D.C. than in Baltimore, Eddie.
Yeah, probably, but you never know. You never know.
That's why they play the games, man. Hey, great to have you on, as always, and continued safe journeys. We'll be catching up with you later on down the road here as we get independent race baseball.
All right, thanks, Nestor.
Appreciate it. Eddie Matz of ESPN. Follow him out there at the Worldwide Leader as well as at ESPN Eddie Matz. That's EDDIEMATZ. And you can find me out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We do come in crystal clear out on the internet and everywhere we travel. You can get the morning newspaper delivered to your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. That's all digitally delivered to you, courtesy of our friends at Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's $10 a month to get yourself into bikini and Ocean City shape here this summer. And if there's any breaking news on that Norfolk shuttle for Buck Showalter and Dan Duquette, you'll get it first on the WNST Tech Service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And Dennis will be here on Thursday driving you home from 3 until 5. It is the SSV on WNST. Me, I'm a very available individual. The Peter Principles are now available as well at WNST.net. Chapter 6 launched on Monday morning. You'll definitely want to check that out this week as well if you love baseball, as well as Eddie Matz's Cuban story out on ESPN. I'll be checking that out this week. But the Peter Principles, not a happy ending to the Peter Principle so far, but one hell of a story that I've tried to chronicle for all the youngins out there and for even the young old-timers like yourself that may remember some of these tragedies of Oriole baseball over the last quarter of a century. Chapter 6 out there right now. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and, of course, email me anytime, nasty@WNST.net. We're also streaming live on our Facebook Live as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.